Not sure if I'm overreacting here, but I think my girlfriend crossed a major line and I don't know where to go from here. I, 29 have been dating Dana, 27F, for about 6 months now. We met through mutual friends, and things have been going really well, or so I thought. Some background. I'm a social worker specializing in trauma counseling. I work primarily with survivors of abuse and violence, helping them rebuild their lives. The irony isn't lost on me because I'm also a survivor of pretty severe childhood abuse, physical and emotional. Dana knows all this. When we first started getting serious, I told her about my childhood and made it extremely clear that I wanted zero contact with my parents under any circumstances. I explained that I've spent years in therapy dealing with the aftermath and that my life is much healthier without them in it. She seemed to understand, though she occasionally made comments about how she couldn't imagine not talking to her parents since she grew up in a family. A couple of relevant details. I inherited my grandparents' home when they passed away a few years ago. It costs a fortune to maintain, so I'm kind of house rich but cash poor most months. I also deal with chronic migraines that developed during my childhood, stress-related, and still get triggered when I'm under extreme pressure. I take medication for them, but they can be debilitating. So last weekend was my birthday, which I don't really celebrate. I've told Dana that birthdays were always manipulation tools in my family. My parents would throw parties to show what amazing parents they were, then use it against me later. After all we did for your birthday, this is how you repay us? I mentioned I'd rather just have a quiet dinner, if anything. I had a really rough day at work, dealing with a client in crisis, and came home exhausted. When I opened my front door, the lights suddenly flipped on and about 30 people jumped out yelling, "Surprise!" I froze in the doorway as I scanned the room. Colleagues I barely knew, neighbors, Dana's friends. Then my parents were standing near the cake, smiling. My father approached with his arms out while my mother cried. Dana rushed over excitedly, hugging me and whispering, "I found them through your cousin's Facebook. They've changed and really miss you." I felt my chest tighten and could literally feel a migraine starting as my father put his hand on my shoulder. Thankfully, my professional training kicked in, and I managed to stay composed enough to mumble that I needed a moment, then slipped upstairs to take my migraine medication. Instead of going back down right away, I sat on my bed for almost an hour, just trying to process what was happening. I could hear laughter and conversation continuing without me, including my father's pastor voice. When I finally went back downstairs, I just mechanically went through opening gifts and cutting cake, while my parents charmed everyone with completely fabricated stories about my childhood. The absolute worst part was watching my coworkers fall for it all. My clinical supervisor actually said, "You never mentioned your father was a deacon at his church." Several colleagues commented on how wonderful my parents seemed. I wanted to scream that these were the same people who locked me in closets and convinced doctors I was mentally ill when I tried to report the abuse as a teenager. I have the medical records to prove it happened. After everyone finally left, Dana was excited about her gift of reconnecting me with my family. I told her I was too tired to talk and needed sleep, leaving her completely confused about why I wasn't thrilled. She texted me the next morning saying my parents had such a wonderful time and wanted to have us over for dinner this weekend. Edit. Forgot to mention that Dana somehow got my parents' contact info from my cousin Jason, who doesn't know the full extent of the abuse. She's been secretly planning this reunion for weeks behind my back. I haven't really spoken to Dana properly since the party. It's been 5 days. She keeps texting that she did a nice thing and doesn't understand why I'm being difficult. Meanwhile, my parents have called multiple times and even sent a letter talking about how good it was to reconnect and how they've found God and changed. It's the same manipulation tactics they've always used. They found God multiple times during my childhood too, becoming saved whenever someone started asking questions. To make matters worse, one of my colleagues mentioned that my father told them some stories about my troubled youth and mental health issues that made me sound unstable. I'm worried about how this might affect my professional reputation and my ability to work with clients effectively. I'm actually really good at my job despite, or maybe because of, my past. I feel completely blindsided and violated. Dana invited people into my home without permission, shared my personal information with my abusers, and potentially damaged my professional reputation. all while thinking she was doing me a favor. The anxiety has triggered daily migraines, and I've had to miss work twice already. I keep going back and forth on what to do about Dana and this whole situation. Part of me wants to end things immediately, but another part wonders if I should try to make her understand why what she did was so harmful. Is there something obvious I'm not seeing? Now for the first update. My girlfriend secretly invited my estranged, abusive parents to my surprise birthday party. Wow, I seriously didn't think my post would get this kind of attention. Thank you all for the supportive comments and advice. It's been incredibly validating to hear from so many people who understand boundaries. It's been about 2 weeks since the surprise party incident, and I've been carefully thinking about how to handle things with Dana. Several people suggested I should just ghost her immediately, but I decided to limit contact while processing my feelings instead of cutting things off without explanation. I know from my work that proper closure is important, even in situations like this. My parents have been relentless since the party, leaving 6 voicemails and sending numerous texts acting like our reunion was some mutual happy event. They've even started scheduling future family gatherings as if nothing happened. I haven't responded to any of their attempts to contact me, which has been stressful but necessary for my mental health. The stress from this whole situation has caused my migraines to flare up badly. I've had to miss 3 days of work already, which isn't just inconvenient, it's potentially jeopardizing a case I'm working on with a teenage client who's in a situation disturbingly similar to what I experienced growing up. The timing couldn't be worse. After minimal communication over text, I finally agreed to meet Dana at a neutral coffee shop downtown. I specifically chose not to meet at my house, which honestly still feels violated after what happened. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Dana was already seated at a corner table, looking nervous but also somewhat defensive. She had a small gift bag sitting in front of her, which immediately set off alarm bells. I took a deep breath before sitting down, reminding myself to stay calm and clear. As soon as I sat down, Dana pushed the gift toward me and said, "I got you something to apologize, but I still think you're overreacting a little. They seem so nice, and they miss you." I left the gift untouched and calmly explained how her actions had betrayed my trust, violated my boundaries, and potentially put my professional reputation at risk. I explained that what she saw as a thoughtful surprise was actually a traumatic experience that had significant consequences for me. Dana's eyes immediately welled up with tears. "But families should be together," she said. "My parents always taught me the importance of family and that forgiveness is essential." When I tried explaining the reality of abuse and how different our family experiences were, Dana interrupted with, "Everyone has difficult childhoods, but your parents told me they've changed and found God now." I felt my migraine symptoms starting to return as Dana continued defending herself. She mentioned that my cousin Jason had also thought the reunion was a good idea. She kept trying to minimize what had happened both at the party and in my childhood, comparing it to normal family disagreements. The conversation grew more heated when Dana suggested that my refusal to forgive my parents might be why I have all these health problems, and that holding on to anger is toxic. Drawing on my professional training, I tried one final time to explain how trauma responses work and why reconciliation isn't always healthy or possible. I kept my voice steady and used the same approach I would with families I counsel, but Dana cut me off mid-sentence. "You counsel people about family reconciliation all the time. You're being hypocritical," she said. That moment crystallized everything for me. There was a fundamental incompatibility in our values that couldn't be bridged. I realized Dana wasn't just making a misguided attempt to help. She genuinely couldn't accept my reality because it contradicted her worldview about family. I quietly told her that I couldn't continue our relationship after such a profound breach of trust. Her demeanor changed instantly. The tears dried up, and her expression hardened as she accused me of being damaged and incapable of accepting love, loud enough that nearby customers turned to stare. I left the coffee shop feeling simultaneously heartbroken and relieved. The relationship I thought I had was clearly built on Dana's perception of who she wanted me to be, not who I actually am. As I was walking to my car, I checked my phone and found a text from my supervisor requesting a meeting about concerns raised by some colleagues regarding your family situation. My heart sank as I realized this situation wasn't just affecting my personal life anymore. Somehow, My parents had managed to plant seeds of doubt with my colleagues, potentially threatening the career I've worked so hard to build. I called my supervisor immediately and briefly explained that there had been an unexpected and unwelcome reunion with estranged family members that had created some complications. She sounded understanding, but still wanted to meet formally to discuss it. After the call, I drove home feeling drained, but also clearer about my next steps. I've started documenting everything: the original party incident, Dana's responses, my parents' messages, and now this work situation. I've also reached out to my own therapist for an emergency session. I've seen firsthand how abusers can be incredibly charming and convincing to outsiders, and my parents are masters at it. They've had decades of practice presenting as loving, concerned parents while privately being monsters. Now I need to protect myself on multiple fronts: personally, professionally, and emotionally. For those wondering about the gift Dana brought, I left it untouched on the table. Whatever it was, it couldn't possibly make up for her actions. Some things can't be fixed with a peace offering, and this is definitely one of them. To answer some common questions from the original post: 1. Yes, I've been considering getting a security system installed at my house now. 2. No, I haven't directly confronted my parents and don't plan to. 3. I'm documenting everything in case I need legal protection in the future. 4. Yes, I plan to explain the situation to my cousin Jason so he understands why he shouldn't share my information again. I've already taken steps to make it clear to everyone in my life that I don't want contact with my parents, and that anyone who disrespects that boundary won't remain in my life. It's unfortunate that it took this situation to make me establish firmer boundaries, but sometimes that's what it takes. I honestly feel like I dodged a bullet here. If Dana could disregard such an important boundary now, what else might she have done down the road? I'm grateful to everyone who encouraged me to trust my instincts on this one and not let her minimize what happened. I'm still figuring out how to handle the situation at work, but I feel more prepared after reading all your supportive comments and advice. Thank you for validating that I'm not overreacting and that my boundaries deserve to be respected. Now for the second update. Hubtab, Update 2. My girlfriend secretly invited my estranged, abusive parents to my surprise birthday party. I honestly thought my last update about the birthday disaster would be the final one, but life had other plans. Thanks to everyone who offered advice and support during what's become the most stressful month of my adult life. And that's saying something. 3 days after the coffee shop breakup with Dana, my phone started blowing up with messages from friends asking if I was doing okay mentally. Confused, I called my closest friend, who explained that Dana had been contacting our mutual friends with her version of events. According to her, I was mentally unstable and had fabricated abuse stories about my wonderful, concerned parents who just wanted to reconnect with their troubled son. She was portraying herself as the victim who just tried to heal a broken family, only to be cruelly dumped for her efforts. I was furious, but not entirely surprised. Classic Darvo tactic, something I recognize from my professional training. My cousin Jason called that same afternoon, sounding extremely apologetic. He explained that Dana had contacted him weeks before the party, claiming she was planning a healing surprise with my full knowledge and blessing. She specifically asked for my parents' contact information to complete the reconciliation I had been working toward. Jason felt terrible when he realized what actually happened and promised to be more careful with my information in the future. I appreciated his apology, but honestly felt exhausted having to reassure him I wasn't mad, even though part of me was. Meanwhile, my professional situation has become increasingly complicated. My supervisor called me into her office to express concerns about how my unresolved family issues might affect my ability to properly counsel clients with similar background. She mentioned that some colleagues had raised questions about my objectivity after meeting my parents at the party. The implication was clear. My parents had managed to charm some of my coworkers into questioning my professional judgment. I maintained my composure during the meeting, but inside, I was seething. This is exactly why I've maintained no contact for 11 years. Despite these mounting pressures, I've maintained strict no contact with my parents. They've escalated their attempts to reconnect, leaving voicemails about helping me through this difficult time, and sending emails expressing concern for my mental health. The breaking point came when they showed up at my workplace with lunch to meet the colleagues we heard so much about. Fortunately, I was in a session with a client, and our receptionist, who knew about the situation, told them I was unavailable. They left behind business cards for everyone at the front desk, with my father's church deacon title prominently displayed. After a draining day dealing with the workplace fallout and another migraine episode, I arrived home to find Dana's car parked outside my house. I saw her sitting on my porch steps, and I realized she wasn't alone. My mother was sitting beside her, both of them looking up with expressions of sympathy as I approached. As I approached, my mother stood with arms outstretched. "Sweetheart, Dana called us because she's worried about you. We only want to help with whatever you're going through." I stopped at the bottom of the steps, maintaining distance. Dana stepped forward. "I talked with your mom about what happened, and I think there's been a big misunderstanding about your childhood. They never abused you." That sentence surprised me. I realized in that moment that Dana had been discussing the intimate details of my abuse that I'd shared with her in confidence. Details I'd trusted her with, now being used against me as my mother obviously denied everything. The betrayal was staggering. I remained outwardly calm. Thank you, years of professional training, while firmly asking them both to leave my property immediately. Dana's sympathetic expression hardened. "Your colleagues should know you're refusing help from your own family while counseling others about healing," my mother added. "We're worried you might be having some delusions again." During my teenage years, when I tried reporting the abuse to school counselors and eventually doctors, my parents convinced them I was experiencing delusions. It was their most effective tactic, portraying themselves as concerned parents dealing with a troubled, mentally ill child who invented stories of abuse. Hearing that word again, delusions, brought back those memories. This time, however, I wasn't helpless. I took out my phone and began recording while calmly stating I would call the police if they didn't leave immediately. Dana became visibly flustered by the recording, quickly saying, "You don't need to be so dramatic," while my mother maintained her composure. They finally left after several tense minutes, with my mother turning back to add, "We'll be praying for you, and we've already spoken with Pastor Williams about your situation. The church is ready to support your healing." The mention of their church involvement made me realize they were building a community narrative about my supposed mental health issues. After they drove away, I checked my mailbox and discovered a handwritten letter detailing my childhood mental health struggles with my father's business card attached. The letter carefully constructed an alternative narrative of my childhood, describing me as a troubled youth who created false memories during therapy. It was clearly intended to discredit me professionally and personally, and eerily similar to the tactics they used when I was younger. I spent the evening securing my house, checking window locks, closing blinds, and moving furniture in front of the back door. Probably overkill, but it helped me feel safer. I also called my supervisor to request an urgent meeting for the following morning, realizing I needed to address the situation professionally before my parents' narrative could further damage my reputation and career. I knew I had documentation, medical records, police reports from when I was a teenager, and letters from my original therapist. That would validate my experience. I'm meeting with my supervisor and the clinical director tomorrow morning. I've prepared a folder with documentation and a clear, professional explanation of the situation. I'm nervous, but also strangely calm. There's something liberating about finally bringing this all to light, rather than protecting my parents' public image, as I'd been conditioned to do for years. For those asking in comments on my last post, yes, I'm documenting everything meticulously. Yes, I'm considering a restraining order if things escalate further. And no, I haven't responded to any of Dana's subsequent texts trying to justify her actions. I've started therapy again to help process all of this trauma being stirred up. We'll update when there's more to share. Now for the final update. My girlfriend secretly invited my estranged, abusive parents to my surprise birthday party. First of all, thank you to everyone who's followed this saga and offered support throughout. I promised I'd come back with a conclusion when everything was resolved. And wow, did things come to a head in ways I never expected. It's been about 3 weeks since my last update. Feels like 3 years, honestly. That morning, after finding Dana and my mother on my porch, I gathered all my documentation, medical records from childhood injuries, police reports from when I was a teenager, letters from my original therapist, and even some painful journal entries I'd kept. I was done hiding and ready to address this professionally before my parents' narrative could further damage my career. The meeting with my supervisor and clinical director went surprisingly well. Shout out to everyone who suggested bringing documentation. Instead of questioning my ability to counsel clients, they expressed serious concern about the ethical violations happening. My supervisor actually apologized for initially doubting me, saying my parents had seemed so normal and concerned at the party that she'd been confused. The clinical director recognized the classic patterns of manipulation immediately. What I learned next, Dana had contacted 3 families of my current clients. How she got their information is still under investigation, expressing concern that my unresolved trauma might be negatively affecting their children's treatment. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was a breach of confidentiality and professional boundaries that created a potential crisis for our counseling center. The director explained they'd already received 2 confused calls from parents asking if they should be concerned about their children's safety with me. That afternoon, I consulted with an attorney, not cheap, but worth every penny. We documented the escalating harassment, discussed restraining order options, and prepared for possible legal action regarding the confidentiality breaches. The attorney advised me to continue recording any interactions and saving all communication attempts. The center's director called an emergency staff meeting the following day. I wasn't expecting to be asked to address the situation directly with my colleagues, but the director believed transparency was better than allowing rumors to spread. Standing at the front of our conference room facing my colleagues was one of the hardest moments of my professional life, but also strangely empowering. I systematically presented the documented history of my abuse, explained how my personal history had actually motivated my career choice to help others, and detailed Dana's recent boundary violations without emotional language. I finished by acknowledging that abusers often appear reasonable in public while being very different behind closed doors, something many of us see in our cases, but sometimes fail to recognize in our personal lives. The response was overwhelming in the best way. Several colleagues who had been noticeably distant since the party approached afterward to apologize for making assumptions based on my parents' behavior. 2 shared their own experiences with family estrangement. My clinical supervisor even suggested developing a center-wide protocol for handling situations where staff members experience personal harassment that affects the workplace, something I'll be helping create in the coming months. I thought things were finally calming down until 2 days later when our receptionist called my office phone. Dana was in the lobby, demanding to see me about the lies I was supposedly spreading. When I walked out with the clinical director, who insisted on accompanying me, I found Dana pacing next to my father, who stood concerned, reasonable, and slightly sad. Before I could speak, my father started talking in the same tone he would use in public, right before inflicting punishment in private. "Son, we need to address these harmful stories before they damage more relationships. Your mother is heartbroken that you'd fabricate such." The clinical director cut him off immediately. I could have hugged her. She stated firmly that this was a place of healing for vulnerable clients and that this confrontation was inappropriate. She added that security had already been called, which I hadn't even realized the receptionist had done, bless her. My father's voice hardened as he said, "You always were a manipulative child, turning everyone against your own family with your victim stories." Security arrived as Dana began crying loudly while repeatedly saying I was punishing her for trying to help. The entire interaction was captured on our center's security cameras, which turned out to be crucial evidence later. As they were being escorted out, my father made his final move, threatening legal action for defamation. The clinical director calmly mentioned the documented evidence, witness statements, and security footage they had collected. He left without another word. In the aftermath, the center has filed formal complaints regarding Dana's confidentiality breaches, and my attorney has submitted paperwork for restraining orders against both Dana and my parents. Hearing scheduled next week. 2 of the 3 client families Dana contacted have written statements supporting me after the center explained the situation, and the 3rd family simply switched to another counselor without drama, which is completely understandable. The most surprising outcome is how I feel personally. There's grief, obviously, for the relationship with Dana that I thought was healthy, for the childhood I never had, even for the parents who will never be capable of real change. But there's also this sense of relief and validation. For the first time, other people witnessed my parents with manipulation tactics firsthand. Their true behavior was confirmed in front of witnesses, confirming what I've always known while simultaneously freeing me from any lingering self-doubt about my decision to maintain no contact. I've increased my own therapy sessions and started attending a support group for adult survivors of childhood abuse, something I'd professionally recommended to clients but never done myself. Turns out, we therapists sometimes need to take our own advice. My migraines have actually decreased significantly now that this situation has resolved with clear boundaries. I'm focusing on renovating one room in my grandparents' house as a form of healing. Life after all this drama is surprising sometimes. I'm in a much better place now than I ever thought possible. Edit. Several people have asked what happened with the colleagues who initially doubted me. Most have been incredibly supportive since the staff meeting, especially after witnessing my father's behavior. One senior counselor actually apologized with tears in her eyes, saying she'd fallen for the same manipulation tactics with her own in-laws for years. Only one colleague still seems uncomfortable around me, but the director has addressed this directly in supervision. Professional environments can be complicated, but I'm grateful for the overall support.